On the morning of January 28, 1986, Reverend Daniel Forsyth stood at his office window at 9 minutes past 9 and understood, for the first time in his professional life, that he had made a catastrophic mistake. Not a financial mistake, not an operational mistake, something worse. Something that had no line on any spreadsheet he had ever built. He had replaced something irreplaceable, and he had not known it was irreplaceable until 19 minutes ago, when his $145,000 machine had played "Praise to the Lord the Almighty" into a sky where 7 people had just died. The Space Shuttle Challenger had broken apart 50 minutes earlier. 73 seconds after liftoff, schools across America had gathered their students in front of televisions. A teacher from New Hampshire named Krista McAuliffe, selected from 11,000 applicants to be the first civilian in space, had been among the 7. The CarillonMaster 3000 did not know this. It knew that it was 8:50 on a Tuesday morning, and that the Tuesday morning program was "Praise to the Lord the Almighty." And so it had played "Praise to the Lord the Almighty" with perfect pitch, perfect volume, and perfect indifference into the January air above Beacon Hill, while Boston was trying to understand what it had just watched. Forsyth stood at the window with his hands in his pockets, listening to the silence where the ringing had been, and felt the precise sensation of a map being wrong. Not outdated, not imprecise, but wrong about what kind of territory it was describing. He had looked at cost comparisons and speaker specifications and attendance projections, and he had made a decision based on everything he could measure. What he could not measure was now sitting in the tower in the form of 4 silent speakers, waiting for next Tuesday's program. In the office doorway, his administrator, Ruth Donaldson, stood watching him. The small television on her desk still showed the branching white plume over the Atlantic. Neither of them had spoken since the launch. Forsyth said, "Call James." Ruth was already reaching for the phone. She dialed. It rang twice. Clara Whitfield answered. Ruth said, "Clara, is your father?" Clara said, "He's already at the door." This is the part of the story that Forsyth would not learn until 5 years later, when Marcus told him over lunch on a December afternoon. James Whitfield had been standing at his apartment door, coat on, key in hand, for 4 minutes before either phone call came. He had been sitting by his east-facing window since 7:40, listening to his radio when the news broke about the Challenger. He had sat very still for a long time. Not from shock, but from the deliberate stillness of a man who has learned to let large things be large without rushing toward them. He was listening to the city through his half-open window, reading the change in it. Traffic moving slower, voices more subdued. The hesitation of a place that is still processing. At 8:35, he rose from his chair. He went to the closet. He put on his coat. He reached into the coat pocket and felt the key. 9.5 grams, worn smooth from 40 years of daily handling, and held it for a moment. Then he walked to his front door and stood there. He had kept this key for 11 months. He had not returned it after the retirement package was delivered and the letter of recognition signed and the CarillonMaster installed. He had kept it because of something he could not have fully explained even to himself. The intuition of a man who had been reading mornings for 54 years, who understood that certain kinds of mornings required certain kinds of answers, and that the machine in the tower could not read a morning any more than a photograph can feel rain. He had not known which morning would come. He had simply kept the possibility ready. He was standing at his door, key in hand, when the phone rang. Clara, before she could speak, "I know," James said. "Come get me." "Did Forsyth call?" Clara asked. "Not yet," James said. "He will." The phone rang again 40 seconds later. "Can you come?" Forsyth. James said, "I'm already at the door." What happened in the tower that morning, what James did in the 16 minutes he rang, cannot be fully described in technical terms, which is appropriate, because technical terms were precisely what it was not. He had Clara drive him to the church. He used his key, the one he had kept for 11 months against a moment exactly like this, to let himself in through the side door. He climbed the 43 stairs alone, his right hand trailing the stone wall, counting the steps without meaning to, the way you count things you've counted 10,000 times. In the bell chamber, he stood for 2 full minutes before touching the rope. He was reading the morning, the cold, serious and unambiguous, pressing through the stone. The quality of the light through the small north-facing window, landing on his left forearm, hard-edged, the winter light that illuminates without warming. The sound of the city below filtered through granite, subdued, uncertain, moving at the speed of people who are still processing what they saw on television an hour ago. 7 people. A teacher who had wanted to show her students the curve of the earth from above. He reached for the rope, felt both hands close around the hemp, felt the bell above him, 847 pounds of bronze, breathing faintly in the cold air. He thought about what this morning needed to hear. Not praise, not celebration, not consolation. Consolation required distance, and there was no distance yet. Only 90 minutes and a wound that was still opening. What this morning needed was witness. The specific human act of acknowledging what was actually there rather than what had been scheduled. The bell saying, "I know, I am here with you. I'm not going to pretend this is an ordinary Tuesday." He pulled. The rhythm was slow. Not funeral slow, more deliberate than that. The way breath moves when someone is in shock and working to stay present. The strokes came at uneven intervals, long pauses, then 2 or 3 quiet in succession, then a single toll that hung in the cold air and faded into something that felt less like silence than like attention. The volume shifted. He was varying his arc, working with the bell's momentum on some pulls and against it on others, so the sound swelled and receded as if the bell were breathing, something the CarillonMaster's fixed amplitude could never approximate. On the street below, people stopped, not all at once. One by one, as the sound reached them, a woman on her way to the Red Line, a man coming out of a coffee shop on Charles Street, 2 nurses walking toward Massachusetts General, a group of students being led across the common. They stopped, and they looked up at the tower, and they stood. Margaret Hollister was one of them. She had been on her way to work at 8:50 when the CarillonMaster had played its programmed celebration, and she had felt what she later described as the wrongness of someone laughing at a funeral. She had stood for the full duration of the ringing, with a cold, specific pain she could not name. And then, she had not gone to work. She had called in and said she was unwell, which was true in a way she couldn't fully articulate, and she had sat on a bench on the common for an hour, and she was still there, 3 blocks from the church, when James began. She heard the change immediately. She rose from the bench and walked toward the tower without deciding to. She stood on the sidewalk below and listened for the full 16 minutes, not moving. Afterward, in a letter she wrote to the church 3 weeks later, she tried to explain what she had heard. The best she managed was this: The bell knew. That's the only way I can say it. At 8:50, the bell didn't know. At 9:45, the bell knew. Same tower, same pitch, same street. But this time there was someone up there who understood what morning it was, and the bell was speaking it out loud for everyone who didn't have the words yet. I didn't cry because I was sad. I cried because I wasn't alone. When James stopped, 16 people had gathered on the sidewalk below the tower. None of them knew his name. None of them had. Inside the church, Forsyth had moved from his office to the front steps, standing in the January cold to hear it better. He stood with his hands at his sides and listened to every second of those 16 minutes. He was a man who had been trained to trust systems. His MBA from Wharton and his MDiv from Princeton had together produced a particular kind of clarity. The clarity of someone who believes that good information always leads to good decisions. He had looked at the bell and seen a sound production system, aging and operator-dependent. He had looked at the CarillonMaster and seen a sound production system, modern and reliable. He had compared them on every axis he could measure and reached a conclusion that was rational, well-documented, and wrong. Standing on the church steps in the January cold, he understood precisely why it was wrong. He had been measuring sound production when the actual product was presence. The specific, unreproducible act of a human being inhabiting a moment and responding to what was actually there. You could not program presence. You could not automate it. You could not purchase it from a company in Wilmington, Delaware, and install it in a speaker array. You could only find someone who had spent decades learning to offer it. When the ringing stopped, Forsyth stood in the silence for a long moment. Then he went back inside. He sat down at his desk. He looked at the CarillonMaster control panel, its neat row of preset buttons, its digital display showing the next scheduled program. He picked up the phone. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Not on the phone. Can I come to you?" James said, "I'll be home in 20 minutes. There is something you need to understand about James Whitfield before the story goes further. Something that explains not just what he could do, but how he had come to be able to do it. He had gone blind at 31. November of 1939. A crane cable at the Charleston Navy Yard. Fast, indifferent, permanent. In the 3 years that followed, as he rebuilt his understanding of every room, every street, every face he knew by voice and weight and the sound of footsteps, something happened in his attention that he never fully explained to anyone because he lacked the vocabulary for it. When you remove one way of knowing, the others do not simply work harder, they work differently. They reach into frequencies of information that sighted attention overlooks, because sight is so dominant, so loud, that everything quieter gets drowned out. By 1945, James could stand anywhere on Beacon Hill and tell you, from sound alone, which direction the wind was coming from, what the temperature was within 3 degrees, and whether it had rained in the past 4 hours. By 1950, he could identify 23 churches within a 2-mile radius by the character of their bells alone. Not just pitch, but the subtle qualities that came from age, repair, metal composition, the specific acoustics of each tower. This was not mysticism. It was information, the kind that takes decades of attention to accumulate, that exists nowhere in any database, that cannot be transferred by description alone. And it was the reason that on an ordinary Sunday morning in September of 1985, 3 weeks after the CarillonMaster was installed, James Whitfield sat in his apartment on Pinckney Street and heard something that he did not tell Forsyth, did not tell Clara, did not tell anyone. He heard the absence. The bell sounded right, the pitch was right, the volume was right, the rhythm was right. A stranger hearing it for the first time would have found nothing to question, but James had held the rope of that bell for 46 years, and he knew its voice the way you know a person's voice, not just the sound of it, but the quality of its presence, the thing underneath the sound that tells you someone is actually there. The CarillonMaster's recording of Utrecht Cathedral's bell was a beautiful sound. It was not First Presbyterian Boston's bell. And more than that, it had no shadow. The shadow was something James had felt for the first time in the winter of 1952, 13 years after he lost his sight. The bell at First Presbyterian had been cast in Providence in 1814. It had cracked in 1919 and been repaired in 1923 by a Finnish immigrant named August Heikkinen, who used a bronze alloy of his own formulation, a recipe written in a notebook that burned with his house in 1931, taking the formula with it. The repair was clean and strong. The crack never reopened. But Heikkinen's alloy was not identical in composition to the original bronze, and over the 30 years since the repair, 2 different metals had been vibrating together every Sunday morning, and they had developed, the way long marriages develop a shared language, a harmonic that neither metal could produce alone. A shadow tone. A second voice beneath the B flat. You could not hear it with your ears. You felt it in your sternum if you were standing in the right place on the street below, or in your palms if you were holding the rope. It arrived a fraction of a second before the audible tone, like a whisper before a shout. When James first felt it in 1952, he thought he was imagining it. He spent 3 years confirming that he was not. Another 5 learning to find it reliably. The specific combination of pull angle, arc, and cold contracted bronze that brought both voices into alignment simultaneously. By 1960, working with the shadow tone was simply part of how he rang, woven into everything, inseparable. By the time the CarillonMaster arrived in 1985, the shadow tone had been deepening for 62 years. It was stronger than it had been when Heikkinen repaired the crack, stronger than when James first felt it, stronger every year as the 2 metals settled deeper into their shared vibration. The CarillonMaster's recording captured the B-flat faithfully, the shadow tone it had never found, could never find. Because the shadow tone existed only in the physical experience of this bell, in this tower, worked by hands that knew what they were listening for. James knew, from the first Sunday the CarillonMaster played, that this was gone. He said nothing. He was waiting to give it to someone. The right person had not come. But he was beginning to suspect they might be closer than he thought. Forsyth came to Pinckney Street at 11 o'clock. He sat at James's kitchen table, without his briefcase, without his notepad, without any of the tools he normally brought to a conversation he needed to manage. He held a cup of coffee in both hands. He looked like a man who had recently been shown that the foundation of a building he trusted was not where he had thought it was. "I owe you an apology," he said. "The decision was defensible," James said, "based on what you could measure. That's the problem. I measured the wrong things." Forsyth looked at his coffee. "I've been standing on those steps trying to understand the difference between what you did this morning and what the machine does every Sunday. I think I understand it, but I want to hear it from you." James was quiet for a moment. The space before speaking that he had learned was not empty. "When I ring that bell," he said, "I'm not producing sound. I'm responding to a morning. Every morning is different, not just the weather, the news, the season, what people are carrying when they walk toward the church. The bell is the first voice. Before anyone sits down, before anyone reads a word, the bell speaks. And what it needs to say depends entirely on what kind of morning it is." "The machine can't know that," Forsyth said. "The machine knows what was true in September when you programmed it. It can't know what's true at 8:50 on a specific Tuesday in January." This morning the machine said praise, because that's what Tuesdays say. But today wasn't a Tuesday. Today was the day 7 people died in front of a nation of children, and the morning needed something completely different. He set down his cup. Presence isn't about skill. Skill is just the prerequisite. Presence is being awake to the specific moment you're in and willing to respond to what's actually there instead of what you planned for. Forsyth was quiet for a long time. "I can come for occasions like this," James said. "When the morning is something the machine can't read, call me. I'll come as long as I'm able. But the regular work needs someone who can learn it from the beginning, someone young enough to grow into it." "I've been watching someone," Forsyth said. James turned his head slightly. "Who?" "A young man named Marcus Rodriguez. He ushers the 11 o'clock service. I started watching him a few months ago, after our conversation last March. You mentioned someone might come. There's something in the way he moves through the church. He's never in a hurry to get to where he's going. He stops, not because he forgot something, because something caught his attention. A person, a quality of light, something he heard. He stops and pays attention to it, and then continues." A slow smile crossed James's face. "That's him. You know who I mean?" "I've been listening to him for 8 months, James said. "I heard him stop in the hallway last April because someone was crying 2 rooms away. He stood still for 20 seconds before he moved on. Most people his age stopped stopping at about 12 years old. He never did." "What do I tell him?" "Tell him to come Wednesday morning at 6, James said. "Tell him to dress warm and come hungry, not for the skill, but for the understanding. If he comes for the skill alone, I'll send him home. And don't tell him about the secondary tone." Forsyth frowned. "The secondary?" "There's something in the bell," James said. "A shadow tone from the 1923 repair. 2 metals vibrating together for 60 years into something neither could produce alone. I'll explain it fully another time. The point is, if you tell Marcus about it, he'll spend years listening for a specific sound. He needs to develop the sensitivity to feel it on his own first. The moment he feels it without being told it exists, that's when I'll know he's ready to understand what he's feeling. And if he never feels it on his own, then he wasn't the right person," James said simply. "And we'll keep looking." Forsyth nodded. He started to rise, then stopped. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Yes." "Was there ever a morning when you couldn't do it? When you came to the tower, and there was nothing, when the bell was just a bell, and you were just an old man, and the presence you're describing wasn't there?" The question landed differently than Forsyth expected. James didn't deflect it. He sat with it for a moment, and in his stillness Forsyth had the impression of someone looking at something they had looked at many times before. "March," James said. 1941. He said nothing else for a moment. Hattie's father had died 4 days before. Clara was 14 months old. I hadn't slept properly in a week. I climbed those stairs and put my hands on the rope and felt nothing. Not grief, not presence, not anything. The bell felt like a rock on a string. What did you do? I pulled, James said, because it was 8:50, and that was what 8:50 required. And the ringing was fine. Nobody knew. The service happened, and the congregation came and went, and it was an ordinary Sunday. On the way down the stairs afterward, I understood something I'd never understood before that morning. He stopped. Presence isn't something you feel, James said. It's something you choose. Every morning, including the mornings when you feel nothing, especially those. He looked in Forsyth's direction with the focused, slightly past-you attention of his sightless eyes. The choice is the whole thing. The feeling is just weather. Forsyth sat with this for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and set something on the table between them. A key. You kept it, Forsyth said. 11 months. I noticed in April that you never returned it. I decided not to ask for it back. This morning confirmed that was right. James reached out and found the key, picked it up. 9.5 grams. Keep it, Forsyth said, for the mornings you see coming before I do. James closed his hand around it and put it in his pocket. Find Marcus, he said. Wednesday morning, early. Marcus Rodriguez was 22 years old and knew nothing about bells. He knew urban planning theory, which he was studying at UMass Boston. He knew hardware. 3 years at a supply store on Charles Street had given him a working knowledge of materials and how things fit together. He knew his grandmother's church, which had brought him to First Presbyterian every Sunday since he was 7. And he knew, without being able to articulate it, that early Sunday mornings in that building gave him something the rest of his week did not. Not the theology exactly, the architecture of the thing. The way intention organized time. Forsyth found him on a Sunday afternoon in February and explained what he was asking. He said what James had told him to say, come hungry for the understanding, not the skill. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He thought about what it meant that a blind man had been listening to him for 8 months and had formed an assessment. Wednesday at 6, he said. Dress warm. The first Wednesday, James met him at the side door before the sky was fully light. He did not explain. He said, walk with me, and began climbing. Marcus followed. 43 steps. Marcus counted them without meaning to. In the bell chamber, James stood in the center of the space for a full minute, hands at his sides. Marcus waited. He had, without knowing it, the quality James had heard from 40 feet away across a Sunday morning. The ability to be still without filling stillness with something. What do you hear? James said. Marcus listened. Wind. Traffic far away. The building. A very low sound, almost more felt than heard. The granite contracting in the cold. It does this every winter morning and every summer evening in reverse. That sound tells you what temperature the bell is working with before you touch the rope. What else? The bell, moving slightly. What's moving it? Wind, coming through somewhere. There's a gap in the north face, third course of stone from the top. Been there since 1887. The bell is responding to a northeast wind right now, swinging toward the south face and back. Can you tell me the direction from the sound alone? Marcus listened hard. The almost subliminal quality of the bell's movement in the air. A slight variation in the resonance as the mass shifted. South face, he said, uncertain. Correct, James said. Put your hands on the rope. They met every Wednesday for 2 years and 4 months. Marcus learned the mechanics with the patient diligence of someone who understood they were not the point, but could not be skipped. He learned how cold contracted bronze responded differently than warm summer bronze, how humidity changed the rope's feel, how to work with momentum rather than against it. The mechanics became automatic in 14 months, faster than James expected, though he said nothing about this. What took longer was the reading. One morning in the spring of Marcus's second year, after a session that had gone well technically, he said, "I feel like I'm getting the mechanics and missing the whole thing." James, sitting on the low wooden bench in the corner, said, "Tell me about last Sunday." Marcus thought. "The 9 o'clock service. I rang the opening sequence. Before you pulled. Tell me about the moment before you pulled." "I had stopped in the hallway on the way up. There was a woman—" He paused. "How did you know about that?" "I heard it in your ringing. Something had shifted in you between the stairs and the rope." "What happened in the hallway?" "A woman was sitting on the bench outside the sanctuary. She'd been crying, recently, eyes still wet. I didn't speak to her. I just stopped for a second, acknowledged that she was there. And then you came up here and rang more softly than you'd planned." "Yes, not from any decision. It just came out that way." "That's not a failure of mechanics," James said. "That's the beginning of reading. You didn't rush past something real. You let it be real, and it came up the stairs with you, and the bell said it. You're not missing the point, you're reaching it. It just doesn't announce itself." Marcus was quiet. "How will I know when I have it?" "Someone will tell you," James said. "Someone on the street. You won't be able to hear it yourself yet, not clearly." That Sunday, Eleanor Marsh came to me after the service. She said the opening bell felt different. Heavier, she said. She didn't know why. He paused. She didn't know about the woman in the hallway. The bell told her. Marcus stood very still. "You'll also feel it in the rope," James continued. "When the morning and the bell and your hands are all saying the same thing at the same time. You'll know that feeling when it comes. It's unmistakable." In the fall of 1987, 16 months into the apprenticeship, Forsyth came to the tower on a Wednesday morning. Marcus had not expected him. James had not mentioned it. Forsyth stood in the doorway of the bell chamber and watched Marcus work through a passage. When Marcus finished, Forsyth said, "I'm considering upgrading the speaker amplification system. Newer model, significant improvement in range and clarity. It's not a full replacement. The original bell stays, your position stays. Nothing about the Sunday service changes. But I wanted you to know." Marcus looked at him. "Does James know?" "Not yet." "Tell him first," Marcus said. "Before the board, before anyone," Forsyth frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because every decision you make about this tower sends a message about what you actually value. Not what you say you value, what you demonstrate. And James has been teaching me for 16 months, partly on the faith that this church is serious about the work. If he hears about an amplification upgrade from someone other than you, that faith means something different. A silence. He'll tell you to do whatever you think is right, Marcus continued. He won't object. But tell him yourself. Forsyth looked at Marcus for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, the look of a man recalibrating a previous assessment. You're more like him than I expected after 16 months. He's a good teacher, Marcus said. Forsyth went to Pinckney Street the next morning. James listened. He said the amplification decision was Forsyth's to make and always had been. Then he said, "How did you find out Marcus told you to come to me?" Forsyth said, "He told me himself." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good. He's paying better attention than I thought." The amplification upgrade was never purchased. Not because anyone forbade it. Forsyth simply found, in the days after the conversation, that he had lost interest in it. Something about the exchange had clarified, again, what he was trying to build. And building it required moving in one direction only. November 10th, 1989. The Berlin Wall had begun to open the night before. By the time James woke at 5:30, images had been moving across every television in America for hours. Crowds streaming through checkpoints, young men with hammers on top of the wall. A city discovering that what it had believed to be permanent was not. 28 years of division ending in a single night. Forsyth called at 6:15.
Over.
Can you come? James was already dressed. Yes, tell Marcus. In the bell chamber, Marcus took the rope at James's instruction. 3 minutes, James said. Read the morning first. Marcus stood without pulling for 60 seconds. The city below was different this morning, not the subdued, shocked quality of Challenger morning, but something rarer. The quality of people who have just discovered that something they had stopped hoping for is true. An astonishment moving through the streets like weather. He rang for 3 minutes. His reading was genuinely good now. 3 years of Wednesdays had produced something real, a reliable sensitivity that James had been observing with quiet satisfaction for months. He rang with the complicated joy the morning asked for, and the bell said it. Then James said, "Give me the rope." Marcus placed it in James's hands and stepped back. James was 81 years old. The stairs were harder every month. His hands were not as steady as they had once been. None of this was visible in what happened next. He pulled. What he played for the next 14 minutes was not celebration alone. It was the layered joy of 28 years of division ending. A joy that contained within it the memory of the wall, the grief of the years it stood, the astonishment of an ending that had seemed impossible right up. It rang like a door opening after a very long time. It rang like a question answered that most people had quietly stopped asking out loud, but had never stopped carrying. And then, 8 minutes in, James found the alignment. The specific combination of arc and angle and the cold November air and the particular state of the metal, 66 years since Heikkinen's repair, the two bronze alloys deeper into their shared vibration than they had ever been. He had found this alignment thousands of times. He found it now with the ease of someone reaching for something in a familiar drawer. The secondary tone arrived. Both voices simultaneously. The B-flat and its shadow. The bell and the memory of the bell's history speaking at the same time. Marcus felt it arrive in his palms. He had been feeling something in the rope for months, an intermittent quality, there and then not there, that he had been unable to identify or reliably reproduce. 3 times he had almost mentioned it to James and stopped himself, deciding each time that he was likely imagining it or misinterpreting something normal. Now there was no ambiguity. It was a second presence in the rope. Not louder, beneath. Not an overtone, an undertone. A voice that was the bell talking to itself about something older than any morning it had been asked to speak to. Marcus stood in the corner of the bell chamber with tears on his face. He was 25 years old and had been learning to listen for 3 years, and the bell had just spoken to him in its full language for the first time, and the appropriate response, he felt. When James stopped, he coiled the rope with both hands in the slow, careful way that had become ritual over 54 years. He hung it on the hook. He turned toward Marcus. "You felt it," he said, not a question. "Yes," Marcus said. "Tell me what it was." Marcus took a breath. He thought carefully, the way James had taught him to think before speaking. "A second voice," he said finally. "Not louder, underneath. You have to be completely still to feel it. It's like—" He stopped, started again. "It's like the bell remembering something." James stood very still. "The bell remembering something," he said quietly. "In 37 years, that's the best description anyone has ever given it. Better than mine." He sat down on the low wooden bench. "I'll tell you what it is." And he told Marcus everything. August Heikkinen, and the 1923 repair, and the burned notebook, and the 37 years James had spent working with the shadow tone and learning what it meant. He explained how to find the alignment, the pull angle, the arc, the specific temperature ranges where it was most accessible, the moment in the bell's swing where both voices converged. He talked for 25 minutes. When he finished, they sat in the bell chamber in silence. Then Marcus said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you needed to feel it before I described it," James said. "If I'd explained it 3 years ago, you would have spent 3 years listening for a specific sensation instead of developing the sensitivity to perceive it. The description would have replaced the experience. You can't receive something you haven't grown the capacity to—" "Heikkinen didn't write down his formula," Marcus said slowly. "No. Maybe that was accident. Or maybe he understood, without having language for it, that some things are lost when they become instructions before the person is ready. I've been waiting 37 years to give this to someone. I was beginning to think I'd waited too long." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question he had been carrying for 3 years, the one he had not asked because he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Was there ever a morning when you couldn't do it? When you came up here and the presence wasn't there? When you felt nothing?" James turned toward the window. "March," he said. 1941. He let the words sit in the air. Hattie's father had died 4 days before. Clara was barely a year old. I hadn't slept properly in a week. I climbed these stairs and put my hands on this rope and felt nothing. The bell felt like a rock on a string. I felt like nothing." "What did you do?" "I pulled," James said. because it was 8:50, and that was what 8:50 required. And the ringing? Was fine. No one knew. The congregation came and went, and it was an ordinary Sunday. On the way down the stairs, I understood something I'd never understood before. He stopped. The silence was the kind Marcus had learned to inhabit without filling. Presence isn't something you feel, James said. It's something you choose. Every morning, including the mornings when you feel nothing, especially those. His voice was even, unhurried, the voice of someone reporting a fact they verified long ago. The choice is the whole thing. The feeling is just weather. Marcus held this. After a long time, he said, "Is there anything left? Anything you haven't given me?" James sat with the question all the way down, the way he sat with everything that deserved it. "No," he said finally. "I just gave you the last of it." He rose carefully from the bench, steadied himself with one hand on the wall, and moved toward the stairs. "James," Marcus said. James stopped. "When I felt the secondary tone just now, I thought I was imagining it. I've been feeling it for 3 months intermittently and talking myself out of it." James didn't turn around, but something in the set of his shoulders changed. "I know," he said.
Get it back.
"You knew?" "I felt you feeling it, and how you rang. 6 weeks ago, you started ringing differently on the mornings when it was present, softer in a specific way, more patient at the top of the arc. You didn't know why, but the bell knew." "That's when I knew it was time to tell you," he dissented. James Whitfield died in January of 1994. He was 85 years old. He had worked every day until the final 2 weeks. Not the bell. His body had made that decision for him in 1992. But the work of attention, the work of listening, the work of being present to whatever morning he was in. Clara said he died the way he had lived, carefully, without waste, having given away everything he had to give. His funeral was held at First Presbyterian Boston. The church was full. Not just the congregation. People from the neighborhood who had heard the bell for 40 years without knowing his name. Margaret Hollister sat in the 4th row and cried with the uncomplicated honesty of someone grieving a person who had done something for them they had never found adequate words to thank him for. Forsyth gave the eulogy. He said things that were true and measured. Near the end, he said, "I made a mistake in 1985, and I want to say it plainly, because James was too generous to say it for me. I thought I was choosing between 2 methods of doing the same job. I was choosing between 2 entirely different jobs, and I didn't know the difference. James tried to tell me in March of that year. I didn't have the capacity to hear it until January of 1986, when my machine played praise into a sky where 7 people had died. I have spent 9 years since that morning learning what he knew. I am not finished learning it. I don't expect to be." He sat. Marcus rang the bell before the service. He climbed the 43 stairs for the 1,000th time, for the first time without James waiting for him at the top, or able to come if called. He stood in the bell chamber in the cold January air, which was serious and clear, the kind of cold that sharpens everything. He stood for 2 full minutes without touching the rope. He was reading the morning. It was the morning of losing someone who had been a constant for 8 years, who had put his hands on this rope every Sunday for 54 years, who had felt something in the hemp and bronze that no recording had ever captured, and had waited 37 years to give it away. Marcus reached for the rope. He found the alignment in the third stroke. He had found it hundreds of times in the 4 years since Berlin Wall morning. But this time when the secondary tone arrived, both voices together, the B-flat and its shadow, the bell and the memory of the bell, Marcus felt something he had not felt before. He felt James. Not mystically, not supernaturally. He felt the accumulated weight of 10,000 Sunday mornings, of 54 years of choosing presence on the mornings when it would have been easier not to, of March 1941, and pulling anyway because it was 8:50, and that was what 8:50 required. He felt it the way you feel the grain of wood worn smooth by 1,000 hands, as information, as history, as the physical residue of a choice made repeatedly over decades. He rang for 12 minutes. Below on the sidewalk, in the January cold, people stopped walking. 11 of them. One by one, as the sound reached them, they stopped and looked up at the tower. Margaret Hollister was there. She had come early, knowing she would need time before going inside. She stood on the same stretch of sidewalk where she had stood on Challenger morning 8 years ago, and she listened to every second. When it ended, she stood in the silence for a moment. She said, to no one in particular, "He knows." She meant Marcus. She had never met Marcus. She did not know his name. She meant someone is up there who knows what morning this is. James Whitfield had made sure of that. After the reception, when most people had gone, Forsyth found Marcus in the side corridor at the base of the tower stairs. He was standing with his back against the stone wall, in the same posture Forsyth had stood in 8 years ago, when he waited for James to descend from Challenger morning. He had not chosen this, consciously. He simply ended up there, as if the corridor had a gravity for people who needed to say something important in a narrow space. Forsyth held out a small envelope. Marcus opened it. A key, worn smooth from decades of daily handling. He closed his hand around it before Forsyth said anything and felt its weight. 9.5 grams. The weight of 54 years of Sunday mornings. The weight of March 1941 and pulling anyway. The weight of 16 minutes on January 28, 1986, and 16 people stopped on the sidewalk below. The weight of August Heikkinen's burned notebook and 66 years of two metals learning each other, and a shadow tone that no recording had ever captured. The weight of a promise kept across a lifetime. His will, Forsyth said. He left it specifically for you. He wrote, "Give it to the one who knows what it..." Marcus stood in the corridor holding the key. Forsyth said, "Do you?" "Yes," Marcus said. Forsyth nodded. He looked toward the tower door, then back. "He told me something 2 months before he died. He said, 'The handoff is complete. There's nothing left to give.' I didn't fully understand what he meant then. I think I do now." "The secondary tone," Marcus said. "He told me about it in March of 1985, when I came to deliver the retirement news. He said my machine would capture what the bell sounds like, not what the bell is. I filed that away as poetry, a sentimental old man's way of describing something he loved. I didn't understand it was a technical description of something real." "It is real," Marcus said. more real every year. The two metals are still settling. The tone is stronger now than when James first felt. It'll be stronger in 20 years than it is today. He believed it would outlast everything, Forsyth said. The people, the building. He believed the secondary tone would be the last thing standing. Marcus looked at the key in his hand. He was probably right, he said. Metal doesn't forget. They stood in the narrow corridor for a moment, the stone cold around them, the tower above them with its 847 pounds of bronze and 66 years of two metals learning each other, and a shadow tone that existed only in the physical experience of being present with it.
The truth is,
There's a young woman, Marcus said. She's been attending the 8 o'clock service for 3 months. Sits in the back. Stays after the service ends, long after everyone is gone, just sitting in the empty church. I've been listening to her. The way she's quiet. Forsyth looked at him. She has it, Marcus said. The quality, the stopping. Have you spoken to her? Not yet. Marcus put the key in his pocket. I'm waiting for the right moment. How will you know when it is? Marcus smiled. Not the full smile yet, but the beginning of one. The same way James knew when to stop ringing, he said. The morning will tell me. He put his hand on the tower door. Wednesday, he said. 6 in the morning. Tell her to dress warm. The key passed to a woman named Priya Natarajan in the spring of... She had come to First Presbyterian in the fall of 2017, sat in the back of the 8 o'clock service for 3 months without speaking to anyone, and stayed after every service in the empty church, sitting with the quality of attention that Marcus had learned to recognize from 40 feet away across a room without looking directly at anyone. He approached her on a Sunday in January 2018. He said what James had told Forsyth to say, and what Forsyth had told Marcus, and what Marcus had been saying to every apprentice since. Come hungry for the understanding, not the skill. If you come for the skill alone, I'll send you home. She looked at him for a moment. She was 28 years old, a sound engineer who taught acoustics at Berkeley. She understood harmonic resonance and bronze alloys and the physics of bell towers better than anyone James or Marcus had ever. She also understood, with the humility of someone who knows a great deal about one way of knowing, that there are other ways of knowing she had not yet developed. Wednesday, she said. What time? 6, Marcus said. Dress warm. She trained for 4 years. She felt the secondary tone for the first time on a Tuesday morning in March of 2022, alone in the tower during a practice session Marcus had given her. The first time he had trusted her to work in the bell chamber without him present, which was itself a signal she had not fully decoded yet. She was in the 38th minute of the session when she stopped trying to find the secondary tone and simply started listening to the morning itself. It arrived without announcement. She came down the stairs and found Marcus in the fellowship hall.
We did what we had to.
I felt it, she said. He looked at her. Tell me what it was. She thought carefully. The pause before speaking that Marcus had learned from James and had been teaching her without naming it as a lesson. The bell remembering something, she said. Marcus was still for a moment. He had said those exact words to James on the night of November 10th, 1989, in the bell chamber above the city, with tears on his face and the sound of the wall coming down still moving through the stones. Yes, he said. That's exactly what it is. He reached into his pocket. He held the key for a moment. 32 years of his own Sunday mornings now layered over the 54 years of James's. the weight of it more than 9.5 grams by any honest reckoning. He gave it to her. He left it to the one who knows what it weighs. Marcus said, "That's you now." Priya held the key in both hands. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What do I tell the next one when the time comes?" "Tell them to come hungry for the understanding," Marcus said. "Tell them it takes years. Tell them the most important thing they'll learn has nothing to do with the bell. And tell them that the morning they arrive is already the first lesson, whether they know it or not. The bell at First Presbyterian Boston rings every Sunday morning. It is rung by hand, with one brief interruption of 11 months, since 1814. The granite of the tower has absorbed the vibration of 847 pounds of bronze through 2 centuries and 4 wars and 1 depression and 1,000 ordinary Sundays and a handful of mornings that required something the schedule could not provide. The crack repair from 1923 is holding. The secondary tone is stronger than it has ever been. And on the mornings that ask for something specific, the mornings when the world is changed overnight, when the city is carrying something it has no words for yet, when the program sequence would be precisely the wrong answer, there is someone in the tower, reading the morning first, listening before speaking, responding to what is actually there. A key in a pocket, waiting for the right morning. A rope on a hook, waiting for the right hands. A bell with 2 voices, waiting for someone patient enough to hear both. The stairs are 43 steps. Someone is climbing them now. The bell knew. At 8:50, the bell didn't know. At 9:45, the bell knew. Same tower, same pitch, same street. But this time someone was up there who understood what morning it was. I didn't cry because I was sad. I cried because I wasn't alone. Margaret Hollister. Letter to First Presbyterian Boston, February